My crush called me too poor to love. Now she's a waitress, and I own the restaurant. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end, and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. The clang of silverware echoed in the back of the diner, mixing with the low hum of traffic from the street outside. Elias Khan wiped his grease-stained hands on his apron and glanced at the clock. 4:47 p.m. Nearly time. His heart pounded harder with every tick. In his jacket pocket was a small velvet pouch, faded and frayed, but precious. Inside it, a handmade bracelet, wooden beads polished with oil and care, strung together with leather cord, and accented with a single small silver charm. He'd saved for weeks to buy that charm. It wasn't much, but it was something beautiful, something from him, something for her. Sophia Elwood. She didn't know he existed, or at least, not in the way he hoped. At school, Elias was the invisible one, the boy with secondhand shoes, the boy who worked nights, the boy who sometimes nodded off in class from exhaustion. Sophia, on the other hand, lived in the sun. The only daughter of real estate mogul Gerald Elwood, she was popular, pristine, and perpetually surrounded by admirers. With her designer bags, weekly blowouts, and perfectly practiced smiles, she was untouchable. Still, Elias saw something more. In the quiet moments between class, when she tucked her hair behind her ear or doodled in the margins of her notebook, he imagined she had depth. Warmth. A kindness hidden beneath the glitter. That belief had kept his feelings alive for 3 years. And today, he would risk everything to tell her. He met her after school, just outside the library, away from her usual entourage. She was checking her phone when he approached, heart in his throat. "Hi, Sophia." She glanced up, blinking as if trying to place him. "Do I know you?" "I'm Elias. We have lit an econ together," he said quickly, holding out the pouch with trembling fingers. I made this. For you." She took it, more out of confusion than interest, opening the pouch and pulling out the bracelet. Her expression flickered. Then she laughed. It wasn't a cruel laugh at first, just surprised, dismissive. "You made this?" she asked, turning it over in her palm. "Why?" Elias hesitated, cheeks burning. "Because I like you. I've liked you for a long time." A beat of silence. Then came the words that would follow him like a scar. "You're sweet," she said, her tone sharpening. "But seriously, you think this?" She lifted the bracelet. "And your little dishwasher money is going to impress me? You're too poor to love, Elias." He stood there frozen, her words slicing deeper than any blade. Around them, a few students who had overheard snickered. The bracelet hit the ground with a soft thud, and Sophia walked away without looking back, already laughing into her phone. Elias didn't move. Not for several minutes. When he finally did, he picked up the bracelet and clenched it in his fist. There were no tears, only a quiet storm gathering behind his eyes. That night, Elias didn't go home. He stayed in the empty diner, scrubbing every inch of the kitchen until his fingers ached. Rage burned inside him, not just at her, but at himself, for daring to dream above his station, for forgetting where he came from. But rage, when harnessed, becomes fuel. By dawn, Elias Khan had made a vow. He would never be laughed at again. He would rise so high that even the people who once towered over him would have to look up to meet his eyes. And Sophia Elwood? She would remember his name. The years that followed Sophia's rejection didn't just shape Elias Khan, they forged him. At first, the pain was raw. It lingered like an open wound he couldn't cover. Her laughter echoed in his mind during long dishwashing shifts at the diner. Her words, "You're too poor to love," played on loop whenever he looked in the mirror. They weren't just an insult. They were a curse, a challenge, a dare. So Elias responded the only way he knew how, with obsession. He dropped all distractions. Friends faded. Parties were a myth. Sleep became a luxury. Every second not spent in school was consumed by work. He rotated through a brutal cycle of minimum wage jobs, dishwasher, delivery boy, gas station clerk, never stopping, never complaining. But while others saw labor, Elias saw leverage. Late at night, after his shifts, he devoured business books from the local library, books about branding, restaurant operations, venture capital, and tech startups. He studied how food delivery platforms worked, how restaurants failed, how menus were engineered, and why customer loyalty mattered more than pricing. Every greasy plate he washed, every delayed tip he endured, gave him real-world insight into what most entrepreneurs never touched: the gut-level grind of the food industry. Then came the turning point. One day, while juggling 2 delivery jobs and managing a food blog on the side, Elias had an idea. A simple one. What if there was a platform where independent chefs could rent professional kitchens by the hour and offer delivery-only menus without opening a full restaurant? No storefront, no waitstaff, just food, chefs, and access. It started as a side project. He coded the prototype himself, using borrowed library computers and free open-source tools. He pitched it to local chefs, some of whom remembered him from his dishwashing days and gave him a shot out of pity or curiosity. It worked. Within a year, his app, Flavor Bridge, was quietly revolutionizing how underdog cooks reached hungry customers. Venture capital noticed. By the time Elias turned 25, he had offices in 3 cities, investors in his inbox, and offers to sell for millions. But he didn't sell. Instead, he pivoted. With his newfound capital, Elias opened his first full-scale restaurant, the Gilded Lily. Sleek, intimate, and draped in elegance, the restaurant was nothing like the greasy diners of his past. It was a place where chandeliers cast soft gold light over dishes curated with precision. The menu changed seasonally. The wine list was sourced from boutique vineyards. Everything, down to the shape of the cutlery, was chosen with meticulous care. Critics called him a disruptor. Food influencers called him a genius. Magazines dubbed him the boy who served up his pain on a silver platter. But Elias didn't care about headlines. Not really. He remembered the bracelet. He remembered the moment it hit the pavement. And most of all, he remembered her, Sophia Elwood, with her cruel smile and diamond-studded insults. Even with his suits tailored, his bank account overflowing, and his name trending on social media, something in Elias remained unfinished. His empire was growing. His legacy was forming, but in the quiet hours, when the restaurant had closed and the soft jazz music faded out, Elias would sometimes stand by the window of his penthouse office and whisper her name, not with longing, but with focus. He hadn't built all this for her, but oh, he couldn't wait for her to see it. The Elwoods were once the kind of family you read about in society columns. Diamond-studded galas, black-tie charity auctions, weekend getaways to Lake Como. Gerald Elwood, Sophia's father, was a real estate titan whose empire blanketed the skyline. Glossy magazines named him the visionary behind the city's boom. His face was everywhere, always smiling, always shaking hands. And Sophia? She was the golden girl. The one with the trust fund, the private school pedigree, and the designer wardrobe that rotated weekly. Wherever she went, doors opened. Whatever she wanted, she received. Her life had been built on marble floors and champagne bubbles, until it all shattered, spectacularly. It started with whispers. A news blog leaked an anonymous tip. Gerald Elwood's construction firm had been funneling investment funds through fake development projects. At first, the Elwoods dismissed it with a scoff. Baseless, Gerald told the press. The kind of noise jealous people make. But the whispers grew teeth. Soon, the authorities launched a formal investigation. Headlines exploded across the city. Real estate royalty under fire. Gerald Elwood accused of $40 million fraud. Bank accounts froze. Properties were seized. Investors revolted. As prosecutors dug deeper, more skeletons emerged. Shell companies, offshore accounts, falsified permits. Within weeks, Gerald Elwood's name went from luxury to liability. Sophia watched her world collapse like a house of cards. The media hounded her. Reporters stalked her social media, printing old photos of her at galas with mocking captions. Daddy's little princess now living a real-life Cinderella story. Her family's friends vanished overnight. Invitations stopped arriving. Her phone, once flooded with texts, went silent, except for the constant ping of The worst blow came from the one person she thought she could rely on, her fiancé, Logan Bellamy. A finance executive with polished teeth and even Glossier ambition, Logan had once promised her the world. But as soon as the Elwood scandal hit the news, he began, quote, reevaluating their relationship. He didn't even have the decency to break up with her in person. Just a short, cold message. Soph, this isn't working. I need to protect my career. I hope you understand. Humiliated, abandoned, and suddenly broke, Sophia found herself standing in front of a mirror in her mother's tiny rented apartment, their mansion having been seized by the state. The girl who once had closets full of couture was now choosing between 2 thrift store blouses for a job interview at a restaurant. She had never worked a day in her life. She didn't know how to pour coffee or handle customers. But pride had no room to stand anymore. With trembling hands, she applied for an entry-level waitressing position at a place she had never heard of before, the Gilded Lily. The name sounded elegant, almost familiar. But to Sophia, it was just another shot in the dark. She wore flats instead of heels to the interview. She faked a smile. She hid her shaking hands behind her back. And when the hiring manager looked at her resume, blank except for college, he raised an eyebrow. But maybe he saw something in her eyes. Desperation, humility, hunger. She got the job. And as she walked into the luxurious dining room on her first day, hair tied back, apron on, name tag dangling, she had no idea that the owner of it all, watching quietly from the upper-level balcony, was the very boy she once mocked. The tables had turned. But Sophia Elwood hadn't realized she was walking straight into the story of her reckoning. The dining room of the Gilded Lily shimmered like a stage. Velvet banquettes, polished marble, and the warm glow of candlelight created an atmosphere so refined it felt otherworldly. For most of the patrons, it was an escape into elegance. For Sophia Elwood, it was a battlefield. Balancing a tray of cocktails in one hand and a notepad in the other, she tried not to stumble over her own unfamiliar steps. Her first week had been hell. Her feet ached. Her fingers bore tiny burns and cuts from hasty mistakes. She'd been scolded by the head server 3 times for mixing up wine orders, and yet, somehow, she hadn't quit. The humiliation was relentless. Guests barely made eye contact. One customer, in a sharp navy suit and smug grin, had even said, "You look like someone I've seen in the society page." What happened? Daddy's trust fund run dry? She'd smiled, clenched her jaw, and cleared the table in silence. From the glass-walled office above the dining floor, Elias Khan watched it all unfold. He knew the moment she walked in on her first day. Her name had stopped him cold on the hiring spreadsheet, Sophia Elwood. For a brief second, he thought it was a joke. But then she stepped into his restaurant, different, yet unmistakable. Her posture wasn't as proud, her eyes not as sharp, but she was still her. And he was no longer the boy she once laughed at. He watched from behind one-way glass. At first, it was pure vindication. Seeing her in an apron, taking orders, rushing to refill water glasses, it was the karmic poetry he had imagined so many times over the years. But it wasn't enough. Elias couldn't help himself. He needed to see her closer. So he began walking the floor in disguise. Not as the owner, but as a silent investor, introduced casually by the general manager. He wore simple blazers instead of his custom-tailored suits. No one recognized him, especially not her. Sophia served him twice without flinching. She didn't even glance at him beyond the required pleasantries. He almost laughed. The girl who once humiliated me doesn't even know she's serving me a glass of wine. And yet, something felt off. She didn't snap at staff. She didn't roll her eyes. She took her criticisms with quiet nods and tightened lips. When an older waiter dropped a stack of silverware during a dinner rush, she knelt beside him to help, even though it wasn't her section. This wasn't the Sophia he remembered. Elias's satisfaction began to curdle into something else. Curiosity. Was she faking it to keep the job, or had something truly changed? Later that evening, he reviewed her employee file. No references, no work history. Address listed as a small apartment in a part of the city he wouldn't dare walk alone at night. Her emergency contact was her mother. No mention of her once powerful father. There was no trace of the privileged princess who once tossed his handmade bracelet to the ground. He stood at the tall windows of his office, hands in his pockets, eyes fixed on her as she wiped down a table. For years, he had imagined seeing her again, begging for his attention, her eyes wide with regret, her world shattered beneath the weight of her cruelty. But now that she was here, humbled and unaware, he felt something unexpected rising within him. Not pity, not desire, conflict. The past wasn't finished with either of them. But Elias wasn't sure anymore if vengeance would taste as sweet as he had once believed. And Sophia? She had no idea that the man she was calling Sir was the boy she'd broken like glass. Elias Khan had built an empire on discipline, precision, and reading people. He could glance at a customer's shoes and guess their wine preference, spot a minor chip in a dessert plate, and know which chef was losing focus. But none of that compared to the game he was now playing with Sophia Elwood. She still didn't know who he was, but she was under his microscope. And Elias had questions that burned through his mind every time he watched her carry a tray or clock in early. Was this humility real, or just survival? Was the cruelty she once wore like perfume gone, or simply hidden beneath her apron? Did she deserve a second chance, or poetic punishment? To find out, he began testing her. At first, it was subtle. He had the scheduling manager assign her closing shifts 5 nights in a row, each ending with cleaning the restrooms and polishing the brass fixtures by hand. No one complained. They were used to Elias's perfectionism. But for a new hire, it was hell. Sophia didn't protest. Not once. Then came the problem tables. Entitled guests known for being rude, demanding, and impossible to please. Elias made sure Sophia got all of them. One night, a woman in fur ordered her food gluten-free, dairy-free, salt-free, and still sent it back 4 times. Sophia apologized each time with tight professionalism and didn't so much as flinch. "She's stubborn," muttered the head server one night. "I'll give her that." But Elias needed to go deeper, so he arranged to have her trained under Claire, a veteran server known for her sharp tongue and zero tolerance for incompetence. Claire had eaten newer staff alive. Elias didn't warn Sophia. He simply watched. Claire put her through it, criticized her walking pace, her posture, her phrasing when greeting guests. "Don't call them ma'am. You sound like a hotel concierge. Try not to beg for tips." Sophia took it, every jab, every snide remark, and slowly she got better. Faster, sharper. One night, when a bartender called in sick, Claire snapped. "Anyone here ever mixed a real cocktail before?" Sophia stepped forward. "I can try." And she did. Badly at first. But she didn't back down. Elias saw it all, from behind tinted glass, from the kitchen monitors, from the shadows of the floor. And the more he saw, the more confused he became. This woman was nothing like the girl who once laughed at a handmade bracelet and told him he was too poor to love. She wasn't fake. She wasn't entitled. She worked harder than most of the staff and asked for nothing in return. But Elias wasn't ready to let go. Not yet. One evening, he watched her return from a delivery run, soaked from a sudden downpour. Her hands trembled as she tucked wet hair behind her ears, but she still smiled and went back to bussing tables. There was no performance in it. No audience. Just a woman trying to rebuild something, whatever was left of herself. And Elias, once fueled by vengeance, now stood at the edge of something he couldn't name. Was she changing? Or had he simply never seen her clearly before? The questions haunted him, because if Sophia Elwood was no longer the villain in his story, then who was he becoming in hers? The rain had stopped hours ago, but the alley behind the Gilded Lily still glistened with puddles and the occasional drip from the fire escape. It was just after midnight, and the last of the guests had gone home. The staff filtered out slowly, exhausted and quiet. Except for one. Elias stood in the shadows near the back exit, his jacket collar turned up against the wind. He wasn't supposed to be there. Not officially, but something compelled him to stay, to linger after hours, as if instinct had whispered something was about to change. Then he heard it. A soft, muffled sound from the alley. Cautiously, he stepped closer, keeping behind the shadow of a delivery bin. And then he saw her. Sophia. She was crouched near the back wall, her arms wrapped around her knees, her shoulders shaking. Her apron was still on, though wrinkled and stained with a spilled balsamic glaze from a particularly chaotic table. Her name tag had fallen sideways, barely hanging on by its magnet. She was crying. Not the delicate, self-pitying kind of tears Elias might have once imagined her shedding, but deep, silent sobs, the kind that come from being wrung dry, the kind that escape when pride is gone and no one's watching. Except someone was watching. Elias's hand froze on the wall. His first instinct was to turn away, to give her privacy, to keep the illusion alive, that he didn't care, that she was still the villain, and he the victor. But something in her expression, haunted, hollow, human, pierced him. He stepped forward, slowly. She flinched when she saw him, scrambling to stand. "Oh, sorry, I didn't know anyone was out here," she said, wiping her eyes with the sleeve of her jacket, trying to regain composure. "I was just getting some air." Elias said nothing at first. He played the role he'd built over the last few weeks, the silent investor. Kind, distant, vaguely curious. "You all right?" he asked quietly. She gave a brittle laugh. "Sure. Just a 5-star breakdown behind a 5-star restaurant. Comes free with every shift." He smiled faintly. "Tough night?" Her guard slipped a little. She exhaled, long and trembling. "It's not just tonight. It's everything. My life fell apart like a bad soap opera, and I'm stuck trying to pretend like I can handle it." Elias leaned against the brick wall. "Pretending's exhausting." "Yeah," she whispered. "It really is." A pause stretched between them, long enough for Elias to wonder if she'd say more. And then, like a dam breaking, she did. "I used to be horrible," she confessed. "Selfish. Spoiled. I hurt people without thinking twice. There was this one guy, back in high school, sweet, quiet. He gave me this handmade bracelet once. And God, I was awful. I laughed in his face. I crushed him. And I never said sorry." Elias's breath caught. "I don't even remember his full name," she added, voice shaking. "But I think about him sometimes. How I was exactly the kind of person I never want to be again." She turned to him. "Anyway, sorry. You didn't ask for all that. Just ignore me." But Elias couldn't. He stood there, caught between past and present, fury and forgiveness, vengeance and something gentler. He should have felt triumphant. Instead, all he felt was quiet and confusion. Because for the first time, Elias didn't see Sophia as the girl who broke him. He saw her as a woman already broken, trying, somehow, to put herself back together. And it was in that moment that everything began to shift. The gilded lily gleamed like gold under the afternoon sun. It was inventory day. No guests, no music, just staff preparing for a high-profile culinary event set to take place later that week. The restaurant buzzed with movement. Chefs sharpening knives, managers checking wine stock, servers polishing every surface until it shone. Sophia, now 2 months into the job, worked quietly in the corner, folding linen napkins with machine-like focus. She had gotten good, really good. Guests had started requesting her by name. The head server no longer hovered. Even Claire, the toughest critic in the building, had once murmured, "Not bad, Elwood," before walking away. But today, something felt off. Managers were tense. A murmur passed among the staff that the owner would be stopping by for a surprise address. No one had ever seen him. Not really. Some said he was reclusive. Others believed he was just a figurehead who let the general manager run everything. but his reputation preceded him. Sophia straightened her apron. Her heart beat a little faster. Something about today made her uneasy. Then the room fell silent. Footsteps echoed on the marble floor. And there he was. Elias Khan walked in, dressed in charcoal gray, sharply tailored from head to toe. No longer the soft-spoken investor who occasionally lingered in the shadows. His posture was different now, commanding, elegant, magnetic. The air around him changed the energy of the room. Heads turned, spines straightened. Sophia blinked. Her breath caught. It was him, the man she'd spoken to in the alley, the quiet stranger who listened as she broke down. She opened her mouth to speak, but Elias raised his hand. "Before we begin, I want to say something personal," he said, his voice steady, every word deliberate. "Not as your employer, but as someone who once walked through this kitchen with grease on my hands and shame in my chest." He stepped forward. "I was once the dishwasher in a place just like this. I worked 12-hour shifts to support a sick mother. I was mocked, overlooked, and told that I'd never be good enough, by teachers, by strangers, and by someone I once admired." Sophia's heart pounded in her chest. "Back in high school, I made the mistake of confessing my feelings to someone who believed my worth could be measured by my wallet. She told me I was too poor to love. That moment broke something in me." He paused, then scanned the room, his gaze landing directly on her. "And that moment also built something in me." Gasps rippled through the staff. A few eyes widened in recognition. Sophia froze, her face pale. "I never forgot those words," Elias continued, "and I swore I'd rise so high that no one would ever be able to look down on me again." He walked toward her now. "And here we are." Sophia's lips parted. "Elias," her voice cracked with disbelief. "I remember you," he said softly. "Do you remember me?" Tears welled in her eyes, but she nodded. More than humiliation, more than shame, what bloomed across her face was remorse. True, aching, visible remorse. "I didn't know," she whispered. I never imagined." "I know," he said. "That's the point." The staff stood frozen, not daring to breathe. And then Elias turned back to them. "But this isn't a revenge story," he said clearly. "This isn't about payback. This is about what people can become when they're given a chance, sometimes even when they don't deserve one." He turned back to Sophia, then did the unthinkable. "I'm promoting you," he said. Effective immediately. A stunned silence fell across the room. Sophia stared at him, speechless. "You've earned it," he added, "not because of who you were, but because of who you are now." And with that, he walked away, leaving the staff in a stunned hush, and Sophia in tears, not of humiliation, but of something far more powerful: grace. The air inside the Gilded Lily felt heavier after the reveal, charged with whispered conversations, exchanged glances, and the soft hum of shock that hadn't yet settled into silence. Though the day continued, something had shifted. Elias Khan was no longer a myth. He was real, and for Sophia Elwood, more than real. He was history, regret, and reckoning all at once. Sophia moved through her shift like a ghost. Guests came and went, but she barely registered faces. Her hands performed tasks automatically, filling glasses, clearing plates, but her mind remained tethered to a moment, now looping endlessly in her thoughts. "Do you remember me?" The words hadn't been bitter, yet they had cut deeper than any insult ever could. She hadn't known what to say when he promoted her. That act, unexpected, generous, had rattled her even more than his identity. Elias hadn't wanted revenge. That alone undid her. By the time her shift ended, Sophia felt hollowed out. She made her way toward the back, footsteps slow, unsure of what she'd find. A pink slip, a second confrontation, another twist in this emotional freefall. Instead, she found a quiet hallway, bathed in soft golden light, empty except for the lockers lining the wall. Her name was written on a small slip of paper taped to one of them. She opened it, and there, sitting gently on the top shelf, was something that made her gasp aloud. A bracelet. Not just any bracelet. The bracelet. The same handmade piece Elias had once offered her in high school. Woven leather and tiny brass beads, still intact, restored. Beautiful. And beside it, a note, folded neatly on cream cardstock, with her name written in careful, clean strokes. Sophia's fingers trembled as she unfolded it. Some things lose their value when judged too early. Not everything poor stays poor forever. The words blurred as her eyes filled with tears. She stared at the bracelet like it might dissolve in her hands. She had barely looked at it back then, just long enough to dismiss it, to laugh at him. Now, holding it again, it didn't just represent his affection. It represented time, the time he had carried that pain, the time he had spent building himself up while she fell apart. And yet, he hadn't thrown it away. He'd kept it, mended it, polished it, and now he had returned it not in anger, but as a message, not of love, but of truth. Sophia clutched the bracelet against her chest, her heart aching with a strange mix of guilt and gratitude. She had no idea how Elias truly felt now, if he hated her, pitied her, or still cared in some buried way. But this gesture said something louder than any conversation ever could. He hadn't forgotten her, and he had chosen in his own quiet way not to destroy her, but to teach her something she had never learned in her years of privilege. Value isn't always visible on the surface. She walked home in silence that night, the bracelet wrapped carefully in her coat pocket, the note folded and pressed to her palm like a secret. For the first time in years, Sophia Elwood didn't feel like a fallen princess or a failed debutante. She felt like a woman finally learning who she was and who she could become. And somewhere, just before sleep took her, she whispered into the darkness, "Thank you, Elias." A full week passed before Sophia gathered the courage to speak to Elias again. The restaurant ran as usual, elegant, refined, impeccable. Staff returned to routine, guests never knowing the story that pulsed just beneath the polished surface. But behind every polite exchange, behind Sophia's professional smile, a quiet storm brewed. She had worn the bracelet every day since it appeared in her locker. It wrapped softly around her wrist now, not as an apology, but as a reminder of the past, of growth, of the man she once dismissed, and the man she now struggled to face. It was nearly midnight when she saw him alone in the rooftop herb garden, his quiet place, she'd heard, where no one dared to disturb him. The city skyline stretched behind him, lights blinking like distant memories. The moonlit breeze caught in his tailored coat. He didn't look like the boy she once laughed at, nor the billionaire tycoon the world gossiped about. He just looked human. "Elias?" she called softly, not trusting her voice. He turned. His expression didn't harden, but it didn't soften either. Measured, controlled, waiting. She began, her voice faltering. "I don't know where to start." "Try the truth," he said gently, though there was a quiet wall behind his words. She stepped forward, the sound of her heels echoing lightly in the still night air. "Back then, in school, what I said to you was cruel, arrogant, and wrong. I didn't just hurt you. I humiliated you. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I needed to say it. In person, with no audience." Elias studied her for a long moment. "I remember every word you said that day," he replied, "not because it broke me, but because it built the man standing here now." Sophia nodded slowly. "You didn't just become successful, you became extraordinary. And when you had every chance to crush me, you didn't. You chose kindness. Why?" He looked out toward the skyline, his jaw tight with unspoken thoughts. "Because revenge is temporary, but character lasts. I had to know who you were, without the wealth, without the status, without the mask." "And what did you find?" she asked, bracing herself. He finally met her gaze. Someone learning, someone humbler, someone better. Silence settled between them, a silence filled with things unsaid, with years they couldn't reclaim, and a bond that had somehow changed shape. Not romantic, not bitter, just real. Sophia took a small breath. "Do you still feel anything for me?" Elias looked at her kindly, but firmly. "Not the way I did. I cared for the idea of you, once. But I've spent too long turning that pain into purpose. What I feel now is respect. For your growth. For your honesty." Her chest tightened, but not from heartbreak. From relief. And from something harder to name. A quiet mourning of what might have been. Had they been different people in a different world? She smiled, even through the ache. "Thank you for not hating me." "I did," Elias said, "for a long time, but hate is a heavy thing to carry. Letting it go made room for everything else." They stood in silence for a while, side by side. No tension, no bitterness. Just two people shaped by the past and sharpened by time. As she turned to leave, Elias called after her. "Sophia?" She looked back. "Don't let your story end with regret. That's not who you are anymore." She nodded, her eyes glistening. "Neither are you." And with that, they parted. No promises, no rekindled romance. Just mutual respect and the quiet, undeniable truth. Sometimes, the greatest love story is the one that teaches you to love yourself. 6 months later, the ballroom at the Avalon Hotel shimmered with soft gold light, the kind that turned ambition into elegance. Beneath a crystal chandelier, waiters served hors d'oeuvre made from recipes Elias once cooked in a cramped apartment kitchen. The audience was filled with city leaders, press, entrepreneurs, and even a few former classmates who now whispered about the pair at the center of the spotlight, Elias Kahn and Sophia Elwood. But they weren't holding hands, they weren't lovers. They were business partners, and they were about to launch something far more meaningful than a restaurant. Elias stood at the podium first. Dressed in a dark, tailored suit, he addressed the crowd not with boastfulness, but with purpose. Behind him, the new logo beamed across the projector screen, the Second Table Initiative, a chain of nonprofit culinary schools and restaurants that would train and employ underprivileged youth across the city. "When I was 17, Elias began, I scrubbed floors in a diner that wouldn't even let me take leftovers home. I was invisible, disposable, and I believed that people like me weren't supposed to dream bigger." He paused. The room was still. But I was wrong, and it took failure, heartbreak, and success to realize it. Tonight isn't about me. It's not even about redemption. It's about building a table long enough to seat those who've always been kept out of the room. The audience broke into applause. Elias stepped back, and Sophia took his place. Gone was the fragile waitress. Gone was the shallow high school girl. Sophia wore a sleek navy dress, her voice steady and clear as she addressed the same room that once belonged to her father's empire. "My name used to open doors," she said. "Then it opened headlines. And when everything collapsed, I lost more than wealth. I lost my identity." She looked at Elias, then at the crowd. "But that fall taught me more than privilege ever did. It taught me to listen, to work, to rebuild." And when Elias offered me a seat, not out of pity, but out of belief, I realized that success isn't about rising alone. It's about lifting others with you. As the launch event ended, the press rushed for interviews, but Elias and Sophia slipped away to the balcony above. The night air was cool and the city lights glowed below. Familiar, but no longer intimidating. "You ready for this?" Elias asked, sipping his drink. Sophia smiled. Terrified, but yes. They stood in a comfortable silence, no longer tied to their past roles. Rich girl and dishwasher, victim and victor. That story had ended. This was something new. "You ever think about how strange this all is?" she asked. "That we ended up here together, but not the way anyone expected?" Elias gave a quiet laugh. "Every day." She looked at him. "Do you regret that it didn't become more?" He didn't answer right away. Then, no. Because this is more. This matters. And she understood. They didn't need romance to make the story beautiful. What they found was something rarer, a partnership rooted in pain, shaped by growth, and defined by impact. A love story? Yes, but of a different kind. As the moon rose higher and the music played below, Elias and Sophia clinked glasses, two former enemies, two transformed souls, united not by what they lost, but by what they chose to build. Together, not as lovers, but as legacy.